Well, welcome to the Free Lunch Podcast. Today's a special day because we've got a double header. Two senior education leaders, the current principal of ICS School in Madrid and the soon-to-be principal of IS School in Madrid, which it says we thought this would be a great opportunity to hear from Chris Bromham, who has been here for, I think, 6 years.
6 years, yeah.
That's right, leading this school, and Sean O'Neill, who is bravely stepping into the principal's chair as of September. So just as a bit of background, ICS, very international school. I think I'm right in saying 70 nationalities present in the school, which is pretty remarkable. Around 1,200 children, 3 to 18, founded in 1980, and in 2002 became part of the Nord Anglia group, which is like a massive educational group, right? With
93 schools, I think.
it says here 89, but maybe there's 4 new ones we don't know about.
There is. It's over 90 now.
37 countries and nearly $15 billion kind of worth of schools. So that's pretty extraordinary. Isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And in fact, Chris, can I just ask you really quickly to tell us the story of how ICS was founded in 1980? Because that itself is quite a good story.
Yeah, it was Manacher Farangi, who was an Iranian citizen and left Iran at the fall of the Shah in the sort of late 70s. And he founded the school in 1980 down in Estepona on the south coast. And initially it was founded for Iranian refugees to give them somewhere they can move and carry on their lives and their education outside of the country. I think it was 2 years later that they moved to bigger premises, moved to Madrid, which is much easier for people to get to. And it just grew from there. And you've seen, Eddie, we've got some photos in the corridor of it practically every year since the inception of the school. And at first you got just sort of 5 or 6 young Iranian men huddled together. And now we're graduated and nearly 100 students last year. So it's a lovely journey to see. And yeah, we're very proud of the roots of the school.
Yeah, and he had a very specific philosophy, didn't he, in terms of what he believed in, which in essence is that across nationalities we should work together and look for our common ground, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what he says, and we have a speech of his that we use all the time. We draw on it all the time, both for special occasions, but also when we have the inevitable difficulties in school. And that idea of speaking to each other, different people from different backgrounds, different nationalities, speaking, understanding each other, seeking to understand each other's problems,
Yeah.
and to empathize and sympathize. And he really believes, he said that he doesn't believe in the innate violence of people, that, essentially people are good,
Right.
and that if they can sit down and talk together, everything can be solved.
Well, it's a very fine foundation principle for a school. And I think later on when we talk a bit more, we're going to find that it's still there in terms of how people feel and think at ICS. So what I'd like to do is the fundamental frame of the Free Lunch Podcast is to talk about leadership. You're both senior leaders in education now. And if we could just maybe kind of just a few minutes on your backstory, what led you into teaching? What's it all about for you, and how did you get here? I'm sure you both got extremely international stories because that's always the case in these kind of schools. So why don't we start with you, Sean?
Yeah, sure. I did not speak yet. No, it's typical. It's a typical day. I started working with Chris. Yeah, so for me, my journey to teaching, I think like many people, I didn't grow up expecting to be a teacher, thinking I was going to be a teacher. It's something which kind of dawned on me. When I left university, like many people, I kind of, was wondering around what to do. I initially wanted to get into politics, actually, and I worked for a little bit supporting MPs and the House of Commons, and I was trying to get into that. And then I did a history degree, and so I got into teaching because I really wanted to talk about history. I love history, and I thought that, that's a really great thing to be able to do, to spend my time learning history, talking about history with young people. And that was really what motivated me. And once that started, it became about the people, not about history. And I think that's what happens when you become a teacher. You realize that you might start with the love of your subject and that passion, but actually it's working with young people that becomes the motivation. So, I still love history, and then started teaching politics, and, what a joy that was to teach history and politics in for a number of years. I did that in the UK, and then was fortunate enough to, become a leader, middle leader, and eventually a senior leader. After being in the UK for a number of years, and then took the big decision to move overseas and to go into international education, and I stumbled upon a really wonderful opportunity in Vietnam. And so I worked in Vietnam in a really fantastic school, a British international school in Ho Chi Minh City, and grew with that school eventually to head teacher.
Right.
And so I was really fortunate to have to really learn in that environment was something really special. And so after 9 years, the opportunity to come back to Europe and to work in a sister Nord Anglia school, ICS, which shared the kind of the principles of internationalism, that was really, really important. I do have to say, actually, working with Chris was actually also a small part.
Turned out to be better than expected.
Well, yeah, it was, I didn't, basically I didn't listen to what anyone else was saying. I went with my own instinct, and I was proven right.
Nice. And because you joined ICS about 2 years ago, is that right?
3 years. So yeah, I've just completing my 3rd year as head of a secondary, and
stepping up into the big chair. And just thinking about what you're saying, I guess it's very much like in business and in companies that you often start off being very focused on your technical skill. So you were teaching history, and then as you go higher up, you end up doing less of that. You do more of the people stuff, because in the end, so many small businesses and growing businesses that I work with, the leaders say to me, I spend all my time with the people stuff, and I used to really enjoy the product and all those things. I hardly ever do it now. That's interesting. All right. Well, thanks very much. So how about you, Chris? Tell us about your...
Yeah, so my degree is maths and sports science, which is almost tailor-made to go into teaching and to go into school leadership. There is an old joke that says the best head teachers are maths teachers with a personality or PE teachers with a brain. So I think that degree prepares me.
I'm trying to work out how you combine those two. You'd be like, 12 boys have done the long jump.
Exactly. So when I finished my degree, the first job I got was selling car insurance over the phone. But I got the job and got up for the first morning for work, and I showered, was looking in the mirror, doing my tie, and thought, your life is not going to be about selling car insurance. This is not what your passion is. So I took off the tie, phoned them and said I wasn't coming, and got on the phone to teacher training colleges. And the following week I was enrolled in a college in Brunel in London to do maths teaching. I never looked back. It's I've just found a real passion. I was very lucky to get into it. And again, I love maths. I love teaching maths. I still teach maths when I can, and when Sean drags me into it now and then. Just moving into leadership, exactly as you say, it's I'm quite opinionated. I'm sure everyone would agree on that, and I like to have my opinion heard. And sometimes that means that you get offered opportunities, and I'm also someone who likes to say yes to opportunities. So I left the UK. I only worked in the UK for about 3 years, which is obviously interesting now. And I went off to Bahrain. I was so lucky. I ended up in one of the best international schools in the world in St. Christopher's, Bahrain. Went from there. The boss, the head teacher there, moved to open a new school in Dubai. And a year later, he invited me over there to be head of maths. And then he moved to Korea and invited me over there to be a senior leader. I became head of secondary there. And then I went back to Dubai as principal, and then here as principal as well.
Amazing. I have to. I didn't know about the Korea bit. I knew you'd been in Dubai, but
3 years in Korea, it was the most amazing experience. But 3 years was enough. A wonderful, fascinating country, but very isolating in all sorts of ways. It was a boarding school as well. And we weren't in Seoul. We were on Jeju Island, which is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in the world. And it's got quite a big city there, Jeju City, but we weren't there. So we were off in farmland, surrounded by Korean farmland. These people had never seen a non-Korean person in their lives, I think, before we turned up. And the Korean government decided to build 3 enormous international schools right in this Korean farmland, beautiful part of the country. So that was an amazing experience. And you know, there was nothing for miles. It was a 40-minute journey to the supermarket, which people would make once a week. And but it was amazing. With North London Collegiate School, which, you know, it was an amazing company organization to work for. And yeah, 3 great years.
I love it. That's very interesting. So why don't we talk a little bit about ICS and specifically the International Baccalaureate? Because I think ICS is a bit of a special school, and we can talk about that compared with maybe the competitive schools around in Madrid. But also one of the differentiating factors, although some schools do International Baccalaureate, but I think that ICS is the only school that offers it in English all the way through the whole curriculum from like 3 years old. So I'd love to hear just your thoughts on that, and what is it that the IB brings compared with other systems?
Yeah. I think the first thing to say is what we're talking about when we talk about the IB, because so many schools around the world will count themselves as IB schools. And what they mean is they offer the diploma program, the final 2 years before university. Overwhelmingly, I'd say about 90% of IB schools just offer the DP program. As you say, what we are is a 3-program continuum school. So we don't do the British curriculum, we don't do the American curriculum, we do the IB curriculum from age 3 right the way through to 18. And we're the only school in Madrid that offers that full program in English, and have been for a long time. I think we've been doing the DP since the school started in 1980. And when we introduced the PYP and the MYP in the 90s, I think we were the 13th school in the whole world. And I think the first in Europe to offer all 3 programs. So we're absolutely dyed in the wool, through to our hearts, International Baccalaureate School.
And I'll pass this one to Sean. If you had to kind of explain to somebody who has no idea what we're talking about, what is it about the IB philosophy or approach to education which sets it apart from other systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a nutshell, to synthesize it, is kind of this idea that it's not just about what you know, it's what you do with what you know. And that brings a complexity which we relish, and because it reflects life, it reflects the world. Our students, if you're following an IB curriculum, you're exposed to a multiplicity of perspectives in every subject. Even those subjects are those domains which are more traditionally prescriptive in an answer, there will be multiple solutions, multiple perspectives or applications to what we're doing, which is a much better reflection of life and the world. And so,
well, I think that's a really interesting point, possibly a better preparation for what's expected of you when you get out there. I recently was with some of your, what grade was that? I think it was grade 11 students a couple of months ago. And I spent a half a day with them talking about leadership things. And then they were set a task to get together very quickly, synthesize a lot of information, put it into presentation, work out who's going to do the talking, work out what they're going to say, stand up and do it. And I was enormously impressed, because that is something that goes on in companies, right? And not many schools teach those skills. And yet I realized that, to your point, regardless of how good the content was, which it still was good, but that ability to kind of self-organize and work out what's important and prioritize in a short space of time. And for, full disclosure, I've got 2 kids at the school, so I'm extremely happy that that's the way that you're teaching them, because I do think that's a good preparation for the real world, if you like.
I think if I can just jump in there, the other thing I always like to say about the IB is about the IB mission statement. And of course, we've got students here who want to get great education, get great results, and go off to a great university. And of course, that's super important to us. But the IB mission statement talks about making the world a better and more peaceful place. And I always think that's the sort of deal with an IB student, is it's not enough for you to just get a great education and great qualifications, but you have to do something with that, echoing what Sean said. You need to go out and do something to make the world a better and more peaceful place, whether it's small or big. And I think IB students, our alumni, are really good at that. We have some amazing alumni stories on our website and on our social media feeds.
just to add to that, what you're saying, because something that we always talk about, this idea of exposing children to difference is really crucial, isn't it? That the earlier we can expose children to difference and then them live that difference throughout their education experience, that will turn them into adults with a broader perspective. And we talked only about, we don't do English literature, we do world literature and American history, world history, and being exposed to ideas and perspectives, but also people in your classroom and around the world is.
So I think that exposure to difference is a really interesting point. I mean, it's like a basic thing, but if you grow up in England and you have Christmas, and then you move to Spain, and they have Christmas too, but you discover that Spain's version of Christmas is actually quite different, and nobody opens their presents on the 25th, and you have to wait until the 6th of January before anything happens. And and so it's the same but different. And I think once you've realized there's two ways of doing it, there could be 200, right? So in fact, that leads me nicely on to the international nature of ICS. I'm pretty sure there's no other school in Madrid which can say they've got 17 nationalities coming in every day. That's a lot of different nationalities, a lot of different cultures. What do you think that brings to the school, and does it also bring some challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what it brings is that lived experience. We're not reading about diversity and inclusion and belonging. It's every single day, it's every single conversation you have. And that's a really powerful thing, that, to have friends that are from different parts of the world, from different experiences, different perspectives, and not just friends, of course, it's people who aren't your friends, just the wider environment. That difference is really important. I should add, actually, what was really noticeable to me when I came to ICS was not necessarily only the 70 nationalities of students, it was the 30 nationalities of teachers. Lots of schools, particularly even British International School, American, your teaching body will be largely from one background. And I thought what's really powerful about ICS is that it's not only the international curriculum, the international student body, but the international teaching body as well. And that adds a great deal of richness, complexity, but also there's a challenge to that, and I think there's a challenge to being aligned around how we talk about education, our training and experiences that lead us to have different pedagogical perspectives. So yeah, I think
That's really interesting, yeah, because obviously we know that there's a French school in Madrid. We know that there's quite a few British, not only following the British curriculum, but with A levels and that kind of thing, but also kind of quite British philosophy. And so you get a lot of British teachers who come over and teach there. So you're going to get a British sort of feeling. But you're right that multinational. I mean, you really. I think probably people outside of ICS and outside Madrid would think that this is a school in Spain, so it's probably quite Spanish. And I think that would be a misunderstanding, frankly, from my experience. I don't think we're very Spanish. And I think, even when I remember with my own kids, that it was like, oh, how are they getting on with their Spanish? Well, not very well, actually, at the moment, because even though they have Spanish classes, the environment.
And this is what we always say to prospective parents, that no school is right for everybody and for every family. It's all about fit. And if parents want to bring their children to Madrid and them learn Spanish within the first couple of months, then there's probably better schools for them to go, where they'll be immersed in Spanish and they'll get that. Here they will learn Spanish, but they'll learn it a bit slower, and they'll learn it as much from their friends and from their activities that they do as they will in school. But
I can attest to agree with that. I mean, that's exactly what's happening with my own children. They're definitely improving dramatically, but not as fast as they would if they were in a Spanish school. Yeah, it's. I think also the other thing that it's both good and bad for, if you like, is the turnover, because there clearly are people who are diplomat families, people who are working for companies for a couple of years in Spain, then they get sent off to Korea or whatever it is, and I think it's quite sad for the children when 2 or 3 classmates leave. But I think also there's something to be said for it, because apart from that, you've now got a friend in Korea, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but also that they do have to deal with that quite difficult thing.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about education as like character development, right? And it's kind of impossible to get character if you don't experience any hardship. And that's, there's small hardships which are, the resilience of experiencing that, experiencing attachment and belonging, and that's a wonderful thing. But experiencing that, it can be quite heart-wrenching, can't it? And I think we've experienced that with our own children. But that's tough. That's a tough thing, isn't it? But when you've you fast forward that 10 years and you're in your early 20s, as you said, you've got this great network, but also you're used to life where relationships can be permanent for life, but they're going to change shape occasionally. They're
Very true.
context,
Because when you leave school, you go to university and you're only there for 3 or 4 years, and then you have to leave again. And when one looks back on our long lives, we have so many friends and people have passed through past that.
And I have conversations quite often about how the nerves that a child might have about a new experience that's coming, and they always say, well, what's the best predictor of what's going to happen in the future is how you've handled something in the past. And lots of the children here say, well, what happened when you moved from from China to the US? Oh, well, I got on really well. What did you do?
I've literally just been doing this. So just before we started recording, I went into grade 2. So these kids are 7 and 8 years of age. And my wife is a grade 2 teacher. So she invited me in to talk about my transition that I have coming up and talk about, what my fears and my hopes and things. And I was a bit worried going in, thinking, what am I going to talk about? These kids were unbelievable. The stories they had at 7 and 8 years of age about their transitions and how they'd coped, and transitions about going back as well, sort of leaving their home country for a while and going back. And it was amazing. It was, we couldn't stop them talking in the end of the time.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? That the experience for those kids at 7 to see you, pushing 40, having those same experiences as the. No, but I do think there's a collective resilience.
Absolutely.
That you actually, as a community, if you add up all of those experiences that this community has had, hundreds of transitions, it's pretty special, isn't it?
And one of the things, because I sort of asked as an opener, or what's going to be different for me, thinking they talk about job and house and things.
Yeah.
The amount of things they came up with were unbelievable. Talking about currency, exactly. Are you going to be without pets? I'm like, oh my God, I am. All sorts of things that I just wouldn't think about. And I have to say, coming out of it afterwards, I did feel a little more prepared, and genuinely.
So I think the other thing, just thinking about it now, my own 2 children coming from Texas after 7 years, and I remember being genuinely nervous about them first day at school, and literally within 1 day I was no longer nervous because they came home, and it made me realize that the atmosphere is very welcoming because the children themselves also understand that there's a lot of change. So you don't have that thing of everybody ganging up against the new kid, because I think they think, well, it might be me next year. So,
Being a mathematician, I always think there's an optimum here, because I've worked in schools, like state schools in the UK, where nobody goes anywhere and they'll stay for forever. And I've worked in schools in Dubai where the turnover is quite large and it's very disrupted. There's that nice balance in the middle where you do have a significant amount of kids who are coming and going, but we've got lots of kids who stay here for 15 years. We had our graduation last month, and out of, I think it was 88 students, I think it was about 15 of them had been there since they were 3 all the way through. So I think we get that optimum sort of balance between the two.
Yeah. So I'd just like to slightly change tack in terms of what we're talking about, to leadership, really. And clearly both of you in important leadership positions. And I always think with leaders, stakeholder groups is a good kind of, when I myself have been in a situation, you've got the analysts, you've got the investors, you've got the customers. Now, in your case, you've got some additional groups. So you've got your parents who are paying, you've got the bosses who want to make sure that, as well as being a great school, you're all also a successful business, which is actually maybe something we could talk about a bit later. But then you've also got the children. And then quite importantly, I think you're going to say, you've got the teachers, another stakeholder group that you've got to keep happy, and you've got to be very focused on quality and all that kind of stuff. So could you just both talk a little bit about those particular challenges and how do you balance all of those different stakeholder groups?
Okay. It's so absolutely at the heart of what we do every day, isn't it? That we seek to, we use this phrase like that, create the conditions, right? We create the conditions where everyone in the community, from whichever group and whatever their perspective, has a confidence in what we're doing, where we're going, and in the community. Right, there's a self-confidence in our community, and sometimes in a community like ours, of course, there are some competing perspectives or competing needs, and that's where the fine balance comes in. But it's what's really great about a community like ICS is where there is a really strong sense of purpose and mission. We can coalesce around that. So when we're thinking around students' learning, students' well-being, that's a pretty powerful, coalescing force, really. For us to come together around that, that is a really kind of useful thing. Quite in terms of pragmatic terms.
Very coherent.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The kind of why, what, how. The why is really clear. What we're here for is really clear. The how we execute that. Okay, there's different perspectives on that, but I think that, and that's where we encourage the dialogue, don't we, around that?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. And I think that's the key. The key is knowing the balance between holding strong to your vision and to your values, and working with the community and working with all these different stakeholder groups, because we're dealing with professionals on the staff, we're dealing with highly educated and intelligent people in the parents. I don't know why I paused there before intelligence. And of course the kids as well. The kids, no one understands their education better than the students themselves. So you'd be wrong to not listen and just, I know there are some schools and some school leaders who think they're not going to listen to anyone and just go forward with what they think is right, which is also a mistake. So it's that balance between having a clear vision, communicating that clear vision, and we're lucky where we've got the sort of the words of Mr. Ferangi and things like that, and the essence of ICS. Hold to that, but also collaborate and work with people, because of course schools change and schools grow as you reflect in society. There's all sorts of things that challenge us every day that haven't challenged us before. So it's working as a community is really important to us.
And don't you think, because we talk, we spend a lot of our time talking to young people about how to be, or how to make decisions, or how to interact, and we try to model that, right? We talk about being confident but humble, right? So that's quite interesting. As a school leader, you're in a situation where you've got 1,000 people there, okay, various different perspectives, but there's a real opportunity for us to model that. Easier said than done, but I think they hold us to that.
Yeah.
We're kind of held to that account a little bit.
Yeah. And I think you'll see it reflected in the classroom as well. It's something I was thinking, when I came here, we don't have a uniform, as you know. When I came here, I was horrified by that idea. But I think I've really come to appreciate it, because it sort of sets the relationships in the classroom slightly differently. And exactly what Sean's saying is that, again, we have our rules, classroom rules, and of course people have to abide by them. They have to do their homework on time and all the basics. Yeah. But it's done through a relationship. And we try and help the kids, and we try and support the students in what the pressures they've got in their lives as well, and working with them. So I think exactly what you're saying, it's that way of being, whether it's a student that we're encouraging them to be, or the teacher in the classroom, or us leading the school.
I recognise them wrong sometimes. I think that's really powerful. So actually, I mean, yeah, I won't comment on that, Chris. But actually saying, that's a really good idea.
Well, it's interesting that you came feeling like a uniform was a good idea, and were gradually won over to the fact that actually it was a structure that maybe wasn't needed.
And I think for here, and I think I've been lucky in the schools I've worked in. I've worked at some excellent schools all around the world. They've all been very different. If I'd have brought in non-uniform in Korea, it would not have worked at all in that context. So it's all about, in this context, it works really well and gives ICS that special ICS flavor. Yeah.
So another thing that I think sets ICS apart, at least from my point of view, and I think ICS is, as we said, quite a different school from many of the others that you might consider to be direct competitors, and that's actually the relationship with the parents. So I'm as happy to proudly say that I'm part of the Parent Association, and that struck me as a real difference when I came back here, because many of the competitor schools of ICS do not even have a parent association, and really parents are a bit left at the gate, which, going back to the stakeholders, does make life easier for you if you can leave the parents at the gate, they're still going to be coming in with their ideas and their suggestions, but you kind of let them in one by one, whereas you very clearly are encouraging that the parents are part of the community.
It's really interesting what Chris said about the uniform. I had a similar experience with the openness to parents. It was just different, and so I was really surprised that when I went to the cafeteria, that parents sitting having a coffee and breakfast in the cafeteria with teachers, and there was a real kind of informal interaction. There was a relational quality to it that, yeah, it was different. And the first few weeks I was at ICS, I had a conversation with so many parents who are just informal and more formal, and when you're coming into that can be, that's an interesting challenge. There's an interesting challenge, yeah. And then as soon as you, I happen to really enjoy those interactions, so that was good. But I think using that as a strength, as a resource, has just been invaluable over this the time. And Chris would say the same, that actually that's a really powerful combination, because you've got people who are really invested, they really want the best for the school, and they've got strong opinions, and they've got good opinions and good ideas. And there's so many examples that I could point to where we've done something, we've made a better decision, the outcome's been better because there's been some dialogue with parents before a decision was made. And that's it's a real asset, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think when you said about, it would be easier for us to leave the parents at the door, I don't agree with that. I think that makes it more difficult, because at the end of the day, you can't educate a child just in school. You have to educate a child as a village, as they say, to raise a child. And without that communication, without that dialogue, it gets harder, I think, not easier. And with my new school that I'm going to, they don't have a parents association sort of situation. And of course, that's a special school that's amazing and got its own qualities. But I'm a little worried about that, about going there and not having that dynamic with the staff, as you think that you were. Well, maybe. But it's, I stand here at the end of the day, every day, and meet with the parents and speak with the parents, largely informally, but I think that makes my job easier, without a doubt.
No, for me, it's definitely a big plus to feel that you're part of the community, because I think that it's possible for your children to go through many years of school without actually really feeling like you as a parent are part of the community.
And actually makes the education better. And there's lots of examples of where the kind of social events, the community events are improved. That happened just this week, actually, where a parent came up with a notice that this event would be better if we had this kind of celebration afterwards together, just an opportunity to come together with the parents and students. And all we had to do was say, yeah, we think that's a great idea. And this parent and her team did an amazing job and just made it better. It was just better for that involvement. And so there's that kind of thing. But there's also things which directly link to the education experience. I think things like the service learning, community engagement work that is part of the IB philosophy and part of the curriculum. That's really is working hand in hand with the parent association to find NGOs for our students to work with. They're out there using their connections. It just makes the education better as well. So, yeah.
And the parents understand what we're trying to do better because of that communication as well. But we'll often find when we have open forums for parents to come in and ask us questions and discuss different issues. And often you'll get maybe a new parent who isn't quite used to that coming in and being quite challenging, and which is their right, absolutely. And often I've realized if I'm quiet, the parents will actually explain what we're trying to do for us. And that's because we've had that dialogue, that ongoing dialogue. People I've worked with now for 6 years, and it's a collaboration, true collaboration.
Yeah. And also when things happen, something that I remember you saying to me, Chris, when I first arrived, was just the power of the phone call. It's always the case in every community, and it really is the case here. And there's so many situations where there's a misunderstanding or there's a difference of opinion, then invite the parent in, or we have a phone call, and it's just the relational quality of the school. I think conversation. It's basically a school that's run on conversations.
Most problems, in my view, in business, in the world, in schools, come down to communication. And the more effective and the more natural communication, the more likelihood is that you're going to get more quickly to a good result.
And that brings us right back, sorry, to Mr. Ferrangi's words. Although he was talking about, intercultural relations and things, it's exactly the same with his problems. Sit down, talk to each other, understand each other's problems and challenges.
Understanding the other person's perspective. So just stick with my stakeholder groups. I think that one has these hygiene factors, right? Things which have got to be right, otherwise no one's going to be happy. So one of those things I think would be the quality of the teaching. So how do you ensure that we have really good quality teachers at ICS? And what is there anything special that you do? Is there any particular thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the case that no school outstrips the quality of its teachers. Right? It can only ever be as good as what happens in the classroom, and absolutely, experience backs that up. And so, there's many ways that happens. One is recruitment. Obviously, that's a really important thing when we recruit teachers. We're very fortunate that lots of teachers want to work at ICS, and ICS's reputation means that it's a great place to be. So so that is we're in a fortunate position. That's not the case for every school, and I think that reputation is something which is hard fought and built over many years. So that's something which is really important. But of course, like any profession, we have to, the educational field evolves. What was good teaching 20 years ago, 10 years ago is not the case anymore. Society changes, children change, our understanding of how the brain works, of how children interact has changed. And so it's really incumbent on us to make sure that we're doing what we can to help our teachers to be professional learners, to see professional learning as it's a right and a responsibility, right?
And I think you do a lot of kind of internal professional development.
So we'll have professional learning observation. So every colleague will be going in and out of each other's classroom, doing kind of quite a formal observation, but really with a kind of developmental focus. We have professional learning pathways where colleagues will choose a particular area of focus and they will work collaboratively. We have action research groups where we connect with institutions like Boston College, MIT, Project Zero from Harvard. So we're involved in those research projects as well. Because we think it's really important. There's lots of wisdom and knowledge in the building that we want to learn from, but it's also really important that we connect with what's out there. And so it's that balance of both of those things, and then do some basics. We can talk about metacognition and all of those really exciting opportunities for growth, but there are some things which are quite fundamental to what makes a good classroom experience, as routines and relationships. And I think those basics are the foundation that we talk about a lot.
Yeah, I've heard you talk before about classroom routines and how it helps if children understand, like, for example, I think I'm right in saying you do have a specific seat, right, where children are expected to sit, right? And that you believe that helps them to kind of...
Yeah, and that will change depending on the class or the focus of the lesson. It won't be the same, but we talk about lesson design, and part of lesson design, of course, is where and how the children interact, how the students are interacting, how they group for that particular piece of their learning will dictate how they are. And it's really important that that we have that feeling, and also there's a social dynamic to that. We know working with teenagers that sometimes there can be a level of anxiety walking into a classroom and seeing where to sit. Actually, there's a well-being element to the teacher's just going to design for us where we're going to sit, and they're going to put it on the board, and we're going to follow that. Actually, there's a well-being element to it as well as
which is probably the argument in favor of uniforms, because not having to worry about what you're going to wear. But I take your point.
I mean, they do largely end up with a pretty similar uniform. They all wear,
jeans and hoodie.
Yeah, they do wear pretty similar clothes.
I think that's very true and quite funny.
But I think the other thing to say about professional development, of course, is we're very lucky that we have these two titans of international education with the International Baccalaureate on one hand and Nord Anglia education on the other hand. The professional development that they provide is literally second to none across the international schooling network. We have Nord Anglia has Nord Anglia University, which is an online platform, which has I think there's everything on there you could possibly need in terms of professional development for a teacher. But we also have a network, so people from different schools work together. So we have the SEN coordinators, special need coordinators across all the schools in Europe will meet regularly and share good practice and work together. Heads of secondary work together, principals. And of course, with the IB, we have IB conferences, IB workshops. We have many workshop leaders. Of course, we've got such an experienced group of staff here. We have a good handful of people who evaluate other IB schools, who lead workshops for the IB, train other IB teachers.
NASC as well, the NASC accreditation process. We have people who lead that on our staff. So, they go to other schools. And so that's, we're really fortunate in that respect.
Yeah. So you mentioned Nord Anglia, and so before we leave stakeholder groups, let's just maybe talk for 5 minutes about being part of, obviously there has to be a bit of tension when you've got money and education together, right? I mean, in the end of the day, I'm not saying that they're not comfortable bedfellows. They have been since the history of time, really, people paying to be educated. But it sounds as though there's already, from what you mentioned, some significant benefits of being part of that big group. And anything else that you'd comment in terms of your experience of working with a big group and kind of having to keep an eye on the numbers, I suppose?
Well, I think the reason I was raising a smile is, tell me a school that doesn't have to keep an eye on its numbers. Right. If you're funded by the government, most governments in most countries these days, you'll be under a lot more pressure financially than we are here. So I think the word profit, people don't like that when it's applied to education, but in reality, what we have is really well-run schools and really well-funded schools. We've had problems, of course, with COVID. When I joined the company back 6 years ago, Nord Anglia was able to withstand COVID really well because we've got the organisation and we got the structure to do that. Whereas a lot of other schools really struggled with that. We had the IT infrastructure, things like that allowed us to go online learning very easily, to support each other, schools supporting each other across the world. So I think the profit there, every school runs on money. Every school has to pay its teachers, otherwise they don't turn up. So it's
I was having a conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone who's the chair of governors at a non-profit international school, and we were comparing. And one of the things he was saying was, quite often in non-profits, of course, you've got amateurs making decisions, and that's with all the best will in the world. But it's people who are volunteers who are volunteering to offer advice, and they're clearly, it's a great thing that they do that. However, inevitably, they might not necessarily be the best placed to make those decisions. Whereas the one thing that we've got is the huge benefit of being supported by really, really high quality people.
And Nord Anglia's business is education. So it's not like you're some part of conglomerate, where around the corner they're making business.
And the great thing for us as well is the amount of people that we can pick up the phone to.
Yeah.
Because, if a lot of situations, if we haven't come across them before, there will be someone else who has. And obviously the confidence that gives, that you've got a network of fellow school leaders to use a support network. I think that, the value of that is amazing, isn't it? It's calculable.
And I think, at the heart of Nord Anglia is education. Obviously, there's a business there as well, and the business needs to run well for the education to run well. But they know that the business doesn't happen unless you've got a service that you're providing. If you're not providing wonderful education in all these 30, 40 odd countries, you're not going to have much of a business for very long. So that is front and foremost in every conversation we have in Nord Anglia, is the education and the quality of education.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, the tension that you talk about, just to address that, when teachers, unlike many other professions, there is a sense that it's a vocation. All right, there's a vocational purpose and motivation that comes into it. And so from a teacher's perspective, they get to fulfill their vocation in a great environment, and I think our role is to just allow them to do that, really. And I think the kind of, how those conditions were created, that's up to us. But we want our teachers to focus on that, which they do.
So take that vocation to the most professional level possible, really.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're kind of, obviously they're aware of the business realities, but as long as we are creating those conditions, I think, then the balance works between those stakeholders, really.
Yeah. And I think the other side, of course, is the fee paying aspect, parents paying fees. But somebody was asking me the other day about what is the pressure different because the parents are paying fees, and I don't think it's any different at all, because there's not many parents in the world who don't want an outstanding education for their kids, whether they send them to the local state school or they send them to the most expensive school in the country. So parents care about education. Most parents care about education regardless of whether they're paying or not.
Yep, that's very true. Okay. So you mentioned something about evolution a few minutes ago and how things change. Maybe it was you, Sean, I can't remember, but one of you said that things evolve and parents evolve and children evolve. And it seems to me that in the last few years, we've had some pretty big evolutions, particularly around technology. And I'm interested, I guess if we're going to tick them off, you've got technology and technology being used in school and technology kind of existing outside of school and in the world. Then you've got specific things like social media, which kind of have their own issues attached to them. And then how that changes children, really. And then now we've got the kind of the new thing rearing its head and coming at us that I sort of feel like we really haven't yet, any of us, worked out what's going to happen, which is AI. So I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. I mean, maybe we just take kind of technology and technology in schools as the first one. How you think that's changed things, and how you think and how you deal with it, and some of the things you see, really.
Yeah. Easy question there, Eddie.
It's a pretty broad question, so
Yeah, I think that the first thing to say is to mention AI. And I know you're asking on a wider scale, but I do think it's the number one question facing educators this year is how do we ensure that AI, which is inevitably going to be a huge part of what we do, how do we ensure that that works to enhance children's well-being rather than detract from children's well-being? That's the heart of it. That leads us into talking about social media, which we're already in that discussion and already in facing that now. Of course, it's really interesting as we're talking that just last week they talked in the UK about banning social media for under 16s.
Did they decide to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, it's been banned for under 13s for years already. And then it's a very difficult. So I definitely applaud what they're trying to do there. And it will help schools. But it's much more complex than that. There's so many kids in every school in the world under 13 who are still very active on social media. So raising the age is going to help. But
I don't think I even knew that it was banned under 13.
Yeah. Well, I think it's banned per app. So Facebook, you have to be 13, Instagram, things like that. But of course, as we know, they're all on it.
What I have to say about the UK ban, my son made a great comment when we was talking about it. He said, so I can join the army, but I can't go on Facebook. Okay.
Well, it would be arguable which would be more dangerous, frankly.
Exactly, but an interesting thing. I mean, on technology in general, I mean, it's been said often, but it's so true that the choices you make with the tools you get is what counts, right? And so there's thinking about the choices that, as educated children and choices, and us making choices in how we use it in the classroom. So the choices the adults make to create the conditions, and then the choices that the students make as a result is really at the heart of it. So, I mean, that's an easy thing to say and a difficult thing to do, but technology in itself has been an incredible advantage to education. And I think that we often talk, and the amount of conversations, as you know, that we want to be really intentional. We're talking at the moment about honing our use of technology. And I think that sometimes we can get, depending on which perspective we happen to be the dominant one in that conversation, we can forget the other. And so if you're at an ed tech conference and everyone's talking about how wonderful it is, then you get down that avenue about all the wonderful possibilities. And then when we're talking maybe in a well-being forum, we can think about the dangers and the worries. And I think our task is to not lose sight of either of those and to try and marry those. How do we make sure, because it's incredible the difference that a child's education can be, that they can design something on CAD and then 3D print it Yeah, that is so different, and as having that kind of very intentional use of technology to enhance learning, but not doing it in an unthinking way.
Well, but perhaps pick up on your point, Chris, about AI, perhaps the difference is that all these bits of technology and new tools, even the internet itself, which kind of kicked off, I suppose, in sort of just around 2000, say, that these are new ways of doing things. These are new tools, so that if you had a photograph of a kid 30 years ago, he wouldn't be holding a phone or she wouldn't be holding a phone, and now they would probably, especially if their parents let them or whatever it is, right? But I think what is really interesting about AI is it's actually possibly changing even the very ground that we all stand on, right? And so it's not just that it affects education or that it affects how people work. It's that it's really fundamentally possibly going to affect sort of really basic ideas about how we do things. I think even on this podcast, I've interviewed people recently who are very, very young, in the early 20s. One extremely bright young man who's left university because he's a developer of software. And he said, I love university. I didn't want to leave, but I can't be at a place where their program is teaching me stuff which is 3 or 4 years out of date. And I'm actually learning more just by being in my room and going online and working with colleagues and doing these kind of things. So this is like very...
I have to say this great thing that I heard the other day, which was really stuck with me, that there's been 3 great humiliations in human experience. The first being Copernicus making us realize we weren't the center of the universe. The second being Darwin making us realize we're just the same as animals. The third being Freud, that we don't even control our own minds, it's our subconscious. And now the fourth, AI, we're not even the smartest thing on the planet anymore. Right? It's changing the way that we view ourselves. And I think that's a really easy shift in that kind of view of what it is. So if we're not the smartest, if we don't, so it's not about knowing the answers anymore, it's about asking the right questions, right? And let's say if that shift from knowledge being answers to questions. But then, I don't know, there's part of me as a history teacher maybe that I know that every single time there's been a technological revolution, there's been a section of society that's been completely doom-mongering in terms of how this is going to be the collapse of human civilization. And maybe when we think about that point, that it's changing from knowing answers to asking good questions, that actually goes back to the ancient Greeks and what it was to have a classical education, wasn't it?
That's quite nicely with your philosophy as
Absolutely,
a school. Right? Yeah. If you were at a school that the whole philosophy is about learning and passing the exam, well, AI is going to do that for you.
Yeah.
But being able to come up with the right answer, think it through,
apply the answer, and
I think
that's actually quite...
Yeah, as an IB school, it's at the forefront of what we do, because it's all about asking questions, and wondering and working out what to answer. Now, there's 2 things to that. One, of course, the most important thing about AI is prompt engineering. I think I'm fascinated by that, is how you ask the right question, how sophisticated you need to be. So educating kids to ask questions, the right questions in the right way, using the right language, has never been so important. But also there's the whole skills Sean mentioned earlier about metacognition and the work we've been doing with Harvard Project Zero and Nord Anglia on metacognition, understanding how you think and understanding how to change the way you think, how to reinforce different ways you think. These are skills that can't be replaced by AI and won't be replaced by AI. So it's that ability to wonder and be creative and to think and to ask questions that who knows what AI will be able to do in the future, but that's where education needs to be now. And I think for me as a teacher, and I don't know if Sean would agree, I'm sure he would, that whenever you're asked a question, you don't know what the answer is, then the answer's got to be education. It's got to be about people learning about things, understanding things better. And I think that's what an IB education is essentially about.
And just to add to that, the other massive thing about what a school is for, to your point about your anecdote then about the university student, is the human connection. So the affective skills, the emotional connection, the empathy.
But it may, I agree with that, but it may force some changes, I think, because to your point, and I think you make a really good point about how things evolve and adapt to deal with a new kind of technology available. And what was the old thing about Henry Ford said, what my customers want is a faster horse, I've actually invented this car thing. And I think that's very true. So you go back 400 years, so there weren't any doctors. And now I suspect we may enter in the next 200 years or the next 50 years into a new situation with doctors, because all of the emphasis was on knowledge. And so you went to an expert doctor for their knowledge. So now that the knowledge is going to be in a machine, you're going to go to a doctor of something slightly different, which is actually probably going to be this ability to communicate that you're teaching at ICS.
Yeah, and what I say, just to say about the point, the emotional point, that's a really good example, isn't it? Of the ability, yes, to communicate, but the ability to see something in a holistic way, to see a person in a holistic way and who they are in a kind of a deeper way than just a set of statistics about them. I think that's really something which is quite nuanced, and the ability to look after your own well-being and that of others. That's really powerful, and that's really, really at the heart of what we need to do, and what we hope we're doing.
I'm minded as well of this. I'm fascinated by this idea of complexity. And I don't know if you've seen the Cynefin framework. I think I've said that right. So it's a Welsh word, so share. And it says there's 4 categories of problems or situations: simple, complicated, complex, and chaos. Now, simple is that there's an answer. There is one correct answer. Most people can work out what it is. Complicated situation is where there is a right answer, but you're going to need an expert to come and work that out for you. Complex situation is where there isn't a right answer. Yeah, exactly. And there's going to be pros and cons for whatever path you choose. Now, that's where AI falls down. It can help you. It can help frame the questions and help get you the knowledge. But dealing in that complex area is innately human, I think.
I'm going to kind of say what you've just described as an answer to Eddie's question about balancing the stakeholders in the school. So what you just described, there's most situations in school leadership fall into that category where there isn't a particular right answer.
Yeah, it would be quite interesting. I'm sure some of the things you faced in the last 12 months as head of secondary and head of the school, with parents, with children, with situations, if you'd asked ChatGPT what to do, I suspect you wouldn't have got a particularly good answer.
I've never thought of doing that. I might start doing that.
I've been doing all this time, Chris. Oh my goodness.
Why am I not finding
Yeah.
All right. And I have been asking people on the podcast this question, which is, AI, do you see it as a friend or do you see it as a foe?
Friend, definitely. Friend, definitely. I think, and to be honest, I think it's almost a moot question, because it's here and it's just going to get bigger and it's going to affect everything. And I think that we've got to embrace it and we've got to move forward with it. And we don't know what it's going to look like. I think that's the key thing. It speaks to our idea, the Henry Ford idea, the idea that we're limited at the moment by imagining what AI can do, by what it can already do. We need to take that step back and look at problems in different ways to see how AI can address those problems. There's the old thing that no one goes to a hardware shop because they want to drill. They go to a hardware shop because they want a hole in the wall. And there might be a different way of getting a hole in the wall. And this is what these are the questions that it's going to ask us. And the more we can get kids to be thinking on that level, that one removed level, it's going to take us in amazing places and amazing.
No, it may be a difficult journey, but yeah.
I was just going to say that each one of those, historical examples of when there was a significant, it's a paradigm shift, I guess, isn't it? In terms of how information is, from the printing press to mass media communications in the 19th century to the internet and now AI. Each one of those has been a democratization, hasn't it? It's been more people having more access to more information. Yeah. Now that shifts at so many things, but I think the optimism of each of those stages.
And we do have a way of working things out, don't we? Whereas these doom and gloom merchants always point to the different things that are going to happen. But if you look back in time, in reality, I can remember my time when I was working in kind of .com travel, that a lot of people were saying, banks are going to be finished, supermarkets are going to be finished, and it just doesn't work out that way. Something else happens, but it isn't usually that doom and gloom.
So parcel delivery is a classic one, isn't it? There will never be no parcels, because not everyone send emails, but and there's never been more. Yeah.
Okay, well, so we've been talking for a while. I actually would like to ask you a couple of sort of roundup questions, maybe a little bit more personal. So I'm going to start with you, Chris. You're handing over to Sean. You've been here for 6 years. Do you feel there's any particular thing that you think of as a little bit your legacy, that something you've done while you've been here, or something that sticks in your mind for your time?
I find this question difficult. I've actually done a recording for my new school today, and the kids asked me some questions, and one of them was, what you're most proud of? And I really struggle. I really struggle because I don't really think like that. I don't tend not to focus on personal achievements and legacy. Maybe I will in time, but I think of it as stewardship. You know, I've come in, and there's some people, some educators go to a school and they'll stay there forever. Now, for whatever reason, that's not me. You know, I think I'm just, what suits me is to go in and stay for a period of time and then move on. But what I'm determined to do is make a difference in that time. So I think working with people, we've achieved a huge amount of things in the 6 years. But I struggle to say with the idea of legacy.
That's fine. I think actually it's a great answer.
About this, we now water the grass. So when I came here, we didn't water the grass. Now we water the grass, and it looks amazing.
And I seem to remember when I first came back, there was a lot of talk about shade needed, and now there's a lot of shade. So there you go. But if you don't mind, can you come up with something that you might say to Sean as you hand the baton over to him?
Well, good luck. Yeah. No, I think, you know, we've been very lucky. I've absolute faith in Sean taking over. It's a tough job being a principal in any school in the world, but I think Sean is as ready as anybody could be, you know, and he understands ICS from top to bottom. You know, primary needs to find out a bit more about primary, but I know he'll love that, and he'll love being down there with the little ones. I think maybe just come back to what we just said about complexity. You know, I think, and you know this already, that there are no right answers. So if you sit around searching for the right answers, you're wasting your time. You know, you know what you believe in, you know what the school is about, and you've just got to go with that. You know, go with that, and there will be problems, and everyone will tell you afterwards where you went wrong, but they won't know where you would have gone wrong if you'd taken another decision. So, you know, you just got to live with that, and people mean well. You know, it's a good community. People mean well, and they love to share their opinions, and I'm always happy to hear them.
So we're at an inflection point. You know, you're departing, and I've just asked you to sort of look back over the last 5-6 years. So, Sean, when you think about stepping into taking over Chris's office, perhaps you're going to have it redecorated, I don't know. But anything on your mind now? Obviously, I realize it's difficult here, sitting here with Chris. You can't even say, I can't wait for him to go so I can do this, this, and this. But is there any sort of big picture thoughts you have about the next 5 years of ICS, for example, and what might be something that's coming down the road that you think we need to deal with, or we really need to work on?
I mean, I'd like to just say that what Chris was saying there about stewardship, or, you know, we're temporary custodians, aren't we? You know, we're temporary custodians of a community, and in really simple terms, can we leave this community in a better place than when we got it, right? And you know, and that's what Chris has done. You know, Chris has left the community in a better place than how he found it. And, you know, in very simple terms, that's what, you know, I think that's your legacy, right? You know, I think that, and that's all that any leader can hope to do. And I think that, yeah, that notion of temporary custodianship, I think, is really important. That we've been handed something which lots and lots of people, in some small ways and some in bigger ways, have helped create over a long period of time, Mr. Ferengi, but many others. And we're handed this thing, and I think it's really important that we treat it as quite a precious thing. And so I don't think great schools go wildly from one direction to another. They're confident in who they are. They follow those steps with a strong sense of their past, their present, and where they're going. So I don't think it's about having, you know, big vision things which are different. Absolutely not. And I think that, you know, always reconnecting to that past, the origins, but also the recent past, why we are how we are, but what we can be, so that, you know, we're each leaving the community in a stronger place than we found it.
Because I would say, as a sort of casual observer, that probably we are gradually getting into this, for this kind of school, a more competitive environment, if you like, because there's a couple of new schools opening. This kind of international education seems to be, if anything, kind of like on the up, right? And so to me, it would be all about really holding on tight to those basic values and making sure that when we think about competing with other schools, that we're really sure that we're doing it on our terms.
And I see that as really positive. I really welcome the fact, I think where there is some healthy competition, it makes us ask those questions. I think it makes us ask this question: what is different about ICS? What is special about us? Where are we going? We have to articulate that, and I think it's actually a really healthy thing that we're in a more complicated and competitive environment in Madrid.
Just the phrase, a rising tide raises all boats.
Exactly. Exactly.
And what was it Warren Buffett said? When the tide goes down, you find out who wasn't wearing swimming trunks. Excellent. And certainly there's nothing more scary than realizing that one hasn't been paying attention, right? And the world has moved on.
I thought you were going to mention something about swimming trunks.
Maybe I wanted to move away from that image.
But I think, just to say that's where Nord Anglia is so important, because, we're here to serve our community, but Nord Anglia wouldn't let us sit on our laurels and just leave the school to just be complacent with it. My boss is constantly asking me questions about where we're going, what we're doing next, and moving things forward. So, you don't get to be as successful as Nord Anglia has been in so many different markets around the world without that real focus on high quality and development.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I wish you tremendous amounts of luck taking over. Sean, it's big shoes to step into, but I'm sure you can do it. I am also would like to wish you a lot of luck in your new school in Oxford in England, right? And we've done a quite good job in terms of visually, you're not so different. Beards, glasses, English.
He has the hair. I've got the looks. He's got the hair. I've got 2 years. I've got his personality.
There we are. There you are. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and I wish you both all the best.
Thank you,
Eddie.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.